in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome our next guest onto the show, Edith Yambo. She is the Vice President of Talent Management at Beacon Mobility HR. Edith, thanks so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, Christina, thank you for having me. Again, Edith Yambo, Vice President of Talent Management for Beacon Mobility. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and ella. I am a Latina and very excited to be here. It's interesting. I sort of thought a little bit about what I wanted to be when I grew up. I definitely did not say HR, but I definitely knew a few things. I knew that I wanted to do something that was aligned to my purpose of wanting to help others, to make an impact in the lives of people that I interacted with. And I also knew that I wanted to make sure that I had opportunities to just be part of a larger, bigger picture. And I didn't see it in an organization. I just felt like I definitely wanted to do something that was fulfilling. And I'm so grateful that I get to do that today. I definitely feel I'm living my purpose, and that I get to combine my love of learning, my servant leadership style, to make the impact of all of the employees that I interact with every day and helping them fulfill their sort of purpose and mission.
Absolutely. And I think that definitely makes sense as a common thread. You're helping folks achieve their full potential, doing their best work. And if you fast forward to today, how do you think your personal journey has really led you to be specifically at Beacon Mobility HR and also the VP of Talent Management?
Yeah, well, I will say I've had amazing mentors along the way. And I have to put a plug in for mentors. They have been a source of strength for me. I am a first generation, so corporate America wasn't something that I understood or knew how to navigate. And mentors played a pivotal role in helping me sort of navigate through that corporate culture and really helping me find my voice and be an advocate for myself. If I sort of reflect back, I think I've always, my parents always instilled the focus on education. They always felt education was sort of the grand equalizer. And if you had skill sets, you would always sort of be ahead of the curve. And for me, again, education and being a lifelong learner is what brought me to sort of the talent management space. So I get to do that. And, Beacon Mobility is an organization that is truly amazing. We're growing quickly. The service that we provide is purposeful. And for me, it was just the right organization with the right leaders doing the right thing that sort of forced me to really sort of contemplate leaving a company that I was with for 10 plus years and joining Beacon Mobility as part of their executive team.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that kind of path definitely makes sense with what you're passionate about, what your skill set is, and just where you seek motivation from. And I have a ton of questions on your experience scaling your HR team, things like the Great Resignation and inclusion and belonging. But before we get into it, I always like to ask, what is, the current problem or situation you're trying to solve? What is taking the most brain space in Edith's mind right now?
There's so many, Christina. I think, as I reflect, change is happening, I think, in an unprecedented pace. Not only change in organizations, but change outside of organizations, right? We are still dealing through the pandemic. We're all at different phases. So for me, one of the biggest areas of focus at Beacon Mobility is really helping our employees through the change. We're growing as an organization, so that on top of all of the change that's happening outside organizations is sort of exasperating that. So one of the areas of focus is making sure that we're helping employees through that change journey and really making them feel part of it and not feel like change is just happening to them. So that's a big focus for us. And I think like every other organization, there is a talent shortage. We are definitely faced with having to pivot and really look at what's our brand? How do we tell our story? How do we attract talent into the organization? And once we attract them, how do we make sure that the culture that we've communicated to them is the one that they're experiencing? So those are the two major areas. And what's phenomenal is that those are two things that are at the center of our strategy. And it's really important for us to have that strategy that has the people at the center of it all. So I'm excited. It's change that I'm sure all organizations are dealing with, but those are the two big ones for us.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we're hearing throughout these conversations and with leaders across different industries who are in HR, people teams, diversity, equity, and inclusion teams as well, trying to understand how to support the team, meet people where they are as well. For hypergrowth companies and startups, we often get the question of scaling and growth. So I want to ask, in your opinion, how do you really evaluate when it's time to bring on your first HR hire?
Yeah. So my answer would have been slightly different pre-pandemic. I think post-pandemic, I would say that as you're scaling up, HR should be one of those key roles that you bring on very early in the process. The pandemic, the amount of change, the diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging equation is at the center of many leaders. And unless you're going to make that part of your strategy very early on, you will absolutely be behind the curve, right? I think that's what employees are looking for, and HR needs to be part of that first phase of hire, and be part of that strategy and carving out the HR strategy very early on in the process. So I would say early on, bring your HR expert in, and really make them part of the strategy development early on.
Absolutely. I think we're seeing more and more HR leaders having a really strong strategic seat at the table, and the earlier the better. I want to ask kind of a specific question around some factors to consider when you're building out your HR team as well. So you're thinking about a first hire, maybe second or third in your team. Are there areas that you definitely think should be prioritized in terms of talent acquisition, recruiting, growth plans, or specific functions within that?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little example. We are very much building the HR function here at Beacon Mobility, and outside of the chief people officer, I was the second hire because they were very focused on it being a people-centric organization where people could come and be their whole self and be developed and really want to be here for a really long time. So I was the second hire. So it makes total sense to bring someone that has that talent management expertise and that could really drive that whole employee life cycle and pull the levers that are necessary. I would say sort of secondary, definitely strong total rewards. We're realizing that organizations and employees want more than just the medical, sort of the basic medical platforms. We're looking at hardship funds and employee wellness programs and mindfulness. And you definitely want to make sure that that's part of the employee proposition that you're creating for employees. And then technology. A really strong technology person is critical. As we build the HR strategy, we want to do one that's very intentional and based on data. And you can't have that unless you have a system that can support that analysis. So to me, those are sort of the critical roles as folks are thinking and starting up, potentially bringing those subject matter experts in the HR fields.
Yeah, I think being super intentional is a really important piece of that strategy, and what I'm hearing you say as well, and that entire employee life cycle, not just when someone joins and is onboarding and maybe is in their perfect, performance review. It's an ongoing process, checking in with your people. We talked about a little bit about just like the talent market that's out there, but there have been a lot of discussions around the quote great resignation. People are really taking stock in what they want to work on, who they want to work for, the mission of the company. In your opinion, how should companies really think about adapting their retention strategies as well?
Yeah. So I will tell you, as someone that resigned 3 months ago from, like I mentioned, a position that I was with and a company I was with 10 plus years, organizations are really going to have to look at that employee value proposition and how, what's the culture that they want their employees to experience, and also the type of support that they're going to give their employees. Again, we were in a pandemic. Many people worked remotely, right? Being flexible and providing flexible schedules are going to be critical. Providing support for individuals that are taking care of parents or children, and providing support there. I think there's multiple levers that, companies are going to have to be pulling at, and all of them start from, the culture and belonging and inclusiveness and, the total rewards. All of those things you're going to have to pull at various levels. It's not going to be a cookie cutter approach anymore. And I think oftentimes we sort of through salary or compensation as part of a retention strategy, that's not going to work anymore. Employees really want to feel connected to an organization, and we're going to have to look at various levers to pull.
Absolutely. That employee value proposition is really important. Thinking of your employees as customers, I often hear in these conversations as well. You have the total inclusive rewards, you have the compensation and the kind of salary that's table stakes, but then you have all the other touch points of having a meaningful connection with your team, with your people manager, and with the company. And then the other piece you said around, cookie cutter, really not checking the box here. I want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and wanted to know how you see companies really take a proactive instead of reactive approach to creating this culture of belonging, especially in the world of work we're in right now.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. We're very early in our phase of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. For me, I think it's a re-education of what that means. There is a thought leader, Damian Cooper Campbell, who used to be, I believe, the chief diversity officer of eBay. And his sort of call to action was that we needed to humanize diversity, right? And move it away from it being a business strategy. It is, but let's think about when you've ever felt excluded, right? How that made you feel. And I think if we can really sort of change how we view diversity, equity, inclusion, and really realize we want our employees to have a really great time when they come to work and feel like they're part of the big picture. And when they don't, gosh, that feels awful, right? And you don't want your employees to feel that feeling of exclusion. So I think, to me, outside of just the normal, like the training and the analytics, I think we need to really just open the conversation and really make this more of a human issue than it is a business issue, and really provide support to leaders to have this conversation. It always doesn't feel great to have those conversations. Many people feel uninformed, and the language is changing so rapidly. We talk about pronouns now. That wasn't something that was prevalent a few years ago. So really helping our leaders just be educated and give them the tools to have those courageous conversations and really turn the lens and make this, go back to, it is a human issue. We don't want our employees to feel excluded. We want them to feel part of this family. And how do we do that? And I think organizations that are looking at it from that lens are really the ones that are moving the needle forward.
Mm-hmm. I think that, taking that human-centric approach is really important, thinking about the resources, the education, the investment that needs to happen here as well. And I do want to ask, in terms of executives and people leaders, who I think are really big proponents or culture conduits, and really set the tone for an organization as well, especially for new folks who are joining the company too, taking cues from that modeled behavior. How do we really keep folks accountable from that education piece to actually being equity-driven leaders?
Yeah, I think, there's an old saying, what gets measured gets done. And I think that is absolutely true in the diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging space. People are at the center of any business. And if you're going to measure a leader's performance on business objectives, and you have to have people objectives in there. And you're going to have to really put some measures out there of what success looks like for that leader. I'm proud that Beacon Mobility has set out some measures that they want to achieve in our 10-year strategy. And it's out there. So there's no sort of paddling back. There's no, I wish it's, written, it's out there, people know. And I think that's going to be critical for leaders and organizations to hold their leaders accountable and measure them against those objectives.
Yeah, there are ways to just, measure these really qualitative goals as well. And I think checking in with employees and teams and asking is really important. The other piece that goes to measurement, people are talking about really healthy, unhealthy, thriving cultures. But to your point too of just like, what does that really mean? I wanted to ask, what are qualitative and quantitative ways you think about measuring company culture if we break it down into key performance indicators like a product?
Yeah. I mean, when you look at qualitative, pulse surveys, and not only pulse surveys at the end of the year, but at the moments that matter, right? When someone joins an organization, when someone's promoted, did they feel that they were supported in that promotion? Do they feel they have all the skill sets? When someone comes back from a leave, are they feeling supported now that they're back at work? Making sure that there are surveys not only at one point in that life cycle, but at various points in that life cycle, and make them quick, right? I've done engagement surveys. It takes about a year to launch. And by the time you're looking at the data, it was a point in time that has passed. So making that feedback loop, one that's instant. We live in this technology world where feedback is instant. Making sure that qualitative data is accessible, it's quick, and that we can, that you can action it very quickly. Don't wait a year or 2 years. So I think that's an area that we're looking at, and I would definitely suggest organizations to look at that as one point of that KPI. I think the other is, the exit interviews. What are people saying when they're leaving the organization? What are the retention rates, right? Are you losing more people at certain locations? Is it, and what is that exit data saying? Is it the person? Is it the culture? Is it the environment? And then also stay interviews, right? Once someone has joined the organization, are they experiencing the culture that we communicated to them? Do they feel they have all of the tools and resources to be successful? And that quantitative data is critical, right? And if you overlay that with the pulse surveys, you'll be able to really predict or even look at some hotspots in areas that you may want to focus on as a leader. So I think the data is so critical for us in HR now more than ever, for sure.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of different data points as you outlined. You want it to be an ongoing process, not a one and done. This is, the time we're collecting feedback, and this is the time we're not collecting feedback as well. You want to make sure you're mapping that employee experience again, just like the candidate experience or a product as well, to make sure that you have a pulse on what's going on with your organization too. And I think that is really critical as well, to think about how you want to build for the future. What is the foundation like? I have read about, and you've shared a little bit about your experience in the field. And one of the other questions I had for you was, what are some of the major changes you've seen in the HR industry over the past 15 plus years? If you had to think about maybe one major one, what comes to mind?
Oh my God, there's been so much change in the last 2 years, right? I think, again, for a very long time, and maybe this is just my own experience, while we said people were at the center of the strategy, it never really felt like that. And I think the pandemic and everything that's happened has really showed us that people are at the center of an organization's success, right? And we're all feeling it now when we have open positions and we don't have the people to move the business strategy forward. So I think there is a hypersensitivity around making sure that organizations focus on the people when they're building their strategy, and less on the widgets and the services and things like that. So I've seen that as a huge switch. And predictive analytics. I think HR probably was a little late on the boat of analytics, but I think now, as you see all of these systems using predictive analytics, being able to hone in on who's the person that may potentially be at risk of leaving the organization, and what are the interventions that you can input quickly before they leave. I mean, that's a game changer, and I think it's something that for HR will really move us back into the spotlight and be able to have those business discussions. So I would say those two areas are definitely areas that I've seen massive changes in.
I think that's definitely kind of a hopeful change as well, when we're talking about not reinventing the wheel or assuming what people need and want. There are so many opportunities to, again, check in with employees, build out your HR tech stack, to leverage technology to as well, and have those predictive analytics to, again, make intentional decisions, iterate, and redesign your employee experience as you see fit as well. How do you fill in the sentence, in order to be successful in the future, HR leaders must have blank?
I definitely think from a technical skill, business analytics is going to be critical. You're going to have to be able to read data, really translate that data into a strategy. I think from a soft skills perspective, empathy, strong relationship management is going to be critical. Strong communication skills is also really important. I think just having the ability to sort of be the North Star or sort of that barometer for the organization is going to be critical, right? Particularly now that we're going through so much. I also think that we're going to have to be better at being sort of at the front of business continuity plans, right? I think when the pandemic happened, we all left home and everyone's trying to figure out what's going on. I think we were all behind the 8 ball and trying to figure out how do we keep the business going? And I think HR is going to have to be instrumental in making sure, how do we keep our business functioning whenever something like this happens again? So that business continuity perspective is going to be critical as well.
And I think that speaks to the proactive piece too, to make sure you have systems in place, you have processes, not necessarily for, another pandemic, but, maybe like something in the future. Yeah. But you want to make sure that you're equipped to really support employees, communicate with them, build that place where they can do their best work. I think that definitely makes sense.
Yeah. No, and I would also say diversity, right? The landscape of our workforce is drastically changing, right? Baby boomers are exiting. We have a Gen Z population that's coming in that thinks very differently of how work should look like. I mean, I have one of my own, and who doesn't want to work for anyone, wants to be an entrepreneur. So how do we, as a corporation or as an organization, fulfill that, right? Maybe that's something that we need to look at, is how do we look at supporting employees' personal endeavors while they're still working with us. And that's something else that we look at as an organization as well, is how do we help that person meet their full potential, not only as an employee, but as a person.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to building meaningful relationships and connection in your workplace and having a conversation about not only work, and work is important. And we spend a lot of our days working, but we're in each other's homes right now. You mentioned people could be taking care of aging parents or be, parents who also, or be parents in general. So I think there's a variety of different conversations that people are leaning into as well, to be able to really ask for and identify what they need.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Is there anything, Edith, that I either didn't ask you that you want to share with our audience, or maybe re-emphasizing 1 to 2 key takeaways you hope people bring with them after listening to our conversation here this afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, I think for HR practitioners, this is an excellent time for us to enforce our expertise and really be part of the decision makers for organizations, and really support them through all of the various things that are important right now. The workforce, employee proposition, employer brand, diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think, to me, this is just a fantastic time to be in HR. It's changing so rapidly, but I think it's everything that we've all hoped for, to be part of sort of that strategy and the decision making. So no, I think we sort of touched a little bit on everything.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your journey and experience with us here today. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Christina, for having me.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in the employee feedback management as a requirement for the company to succeed on a whole. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.